Hello everyone, my name is Alexander Lau, and today I will be presenting on the Voynich Manuscript and its connection to the Silk Road. So an overview of my presentation, first I'll start out about what is the Voynich Manuscript, followed by the methodology, some current evidence for the Silk Road hypothesis, and then followed by the future work. So, what is the Voynich Manuscript? The Voynich Manuscript is a very mysterious handwritten codex. It's been separated into sections called folios, which you can imagine are just front and back pieces of parchment, but an unknown number of them appear to be missing. They are written in a foreign character set called Voynichese. As you can see on the right, you can't really understand any of the text since Voynichese is unlike any language that has ever been known to man. So Voynichese has puzzled researchers for centuries, and indeed there has been a lot of controversy over its research. So as a general history of the Voynich manuscript, first I have to mention radiocarbon dating, which was done on the manuscript to prove that it was written between 1410 and 1420. In addition, it was acquired and passed down by multiple collectors up until the 20th century. The Voynich manuscript is actually named after Wilfrid Voynich, who is a bookkeeper who received the manuscript after purchasing it from the Jesuit college in France around 1912. The last private owner was Hans P. Krauss, who donated the manuscript in 1969, and is now in the Yale University's Beinecke Library, where it is registered under the name MS-408. What is inside the Voynich manuscript? So there are 6 sections within the manuscript. The botanical section, which contains 113 drawings of plant species, the astrological section, which contains zodiac signs, diagrams of the sun and constellations, the biological section, with drawings of bathing nude women, cosmological section, which is a series of 9 multifolio fold-out geographical medallions, the pharmaceutical section, which has over 100 jarred herbal species, and the recipe section, which are just pages of text with asterisks, which we assume is the recipe section because it appears last in the manuscript. Next, I'll move on to discussing the actual methodology we used in the manuscript. So first of all, interpreting the Voynichese text. We identified character sets based on appearance, because characters in Voynichese were mapped as visually similar ones in ASCII. So as you can see on the table on the right, the Voynich 101.text, these are some of the mappings of visually analyzing characters to their Voynichese counterparts. We used an accepted transliteration of the Voynich manuscript, once again known as Voynich 101.text, which helped us reduce discrepancies between which character is actually which and made our research more consistent. So for the frequency analyses, frequency will be the number of occurrences of a word divided by the total number of words. And it can either detect for root words based on our algorithm or the word in addition to prefixes and suffixes. We determined the words with the lowest and the highest relative frequency. For example, the transliteration OK10E is relatively common, so it can't refer to any specific object or pronoun per se. It was considered an adjective instead. So as you can see here, here's a few Voynich words and the frequencies of appearance in certain sections in the manuscript. As you can see, multiple of these words like 2C9, 4OHAN, multiple of them are in the hundreds in terms of the number of appearances, and that's quite helpful. So we decided to compare word frequencies between Voynichese and well-known languages of the time, specifically Proto-Indo-European root languages such as Vulgar Latin, Classical Latin, and Romance languages such as Italian and French. Based on the time period, we assumed that Voynichese uses sentence structure and not hieroglyphics. Similar word frequencies may actually mean similar usages, as in parts of speech. For example, very common words in Voynichese might be equivalent to articles like the in English. Researching plant diagrams. So plants are references for the actual location of the manuscript. And the challenge is to identify where the plants are in order to get a grip of where the plants might have originated from, and therefore what locations the Voynichese author might have known about. The challenge is that many plants actually evolve very quickly with different traits, so that's quite a challenge. And for this, we relied on the work of Dr. Edith Sherwood, PhD. For example, the plant on the right is identified as Dianthus superbus, A herbal flower from Europe and North Asia with edible foliage. Around 98% of the manuscript is identified in this method similar to this one. So for the first words of plants, many words only appear once in the entire manuscript. An example of this is H1S9, which only appears once in the entire manuscript, but H2089 instead appears twice in its root form and once with a prefix or a suffix, and thus does not satisfy the condition of only appearing once. The words only appear once may denote proper nouns, especially inside the plant folios. And we hypothesize that each plant folio's first words might have actually represented their names. So we tested that, and the results were on the previous slide. We found that a majority, or over 50% of first words satisfies the condition, and this heavily supports our hypothesis that the first words refer to plants' names, which could be common or perhaps scientific. Most of the other words have repeated occurrences on the same page and or are references in the homeopathic section, likely as an ingredient, so that justifies their appearance other than just on the first line of the first plant folio. And next, I'll be going into evidence for the Silk Road hypothesis that we've currently gathered. Outside evidence, so our main evidence stems from the inks that are used. As you can see on the right, you can see, this is from the pharmaceutical section, that a variety of inks were actually used. The manuscript's authors definitely didn't hesitate to use any of them. Colors in the manuscript include blue, white, green, red, black, and then even possibly purple. And then via X-ray analysis, the Voynich library was able to actually identify the materials in which these inks came from. Some of these materials include azurite, calcium carbonate, verdigris, hematite, and iron gall ink, which I will discuss more on the following slides. So as for azurite, it represents blue ink and is a very common material on the Silk Road. It was first discovered in ancient wall paintings in India and China, so clearly it has roots before the Silk Road. And the alternative ultramarine blue dye, made from lapis lazuli, was also traded on the Silk Road, but was actually quite expensive on the time. That's why azurite was more common, as you could get it from mines in Hungary, which were relatively closer to Europe, while in lapis lazuli's case, you had to get it from what is now known as Afghanistan, so that took a long time to transport throughout the Silk Road. Calcium carbonate represents white ink and has an evident appearance in both China and Russia. For the former, it was discovered in Chinese glass beads, which were imported from the Mediterranean. It was frequently used in European manuscripts because those originating in Asia would often have lead white as a substitute, and an alternative application is to preserve fragile documents. Verdigris represents green ink and is a copper chlorine resonate. If you don't know what that means, it's essentially just copper chloride, and it is found in many Eurasian countries like Turkey, France, England, Greece, and it was also found in Persia, which is a very major country on the Silk Road. As for applications, it was synthetically used in imperial palace paintings in China and frequently used in Renaissance-era paintings, so clearly this particular dye wasn't exactly the cheapest to procure. Hematite represents red-brown ink and is found in islands like the Hormuz Isle, which is an Iranian island, and Elba, which is found in Italy. It is also identified in wall paintings, which are the same ones that contain azurite. So just like azurite, we know it stems before the area of the Silk Road, and it was a common material in iron mines. Hematite was frequently used in the Victorian era, which is after the actual Voynich manuscript has been created. There's iron gall ink, which represents black ink for the manuscript's text. The manuscript's text makes up the majority of the actual manuscript, as seen in the recipe section, and it was used universally across manuscripts. However, there was actually varying iron content amongst the black inks that were actually in the manuscript. However, they were all identified to be iron gall ink because the abnormalities in the ink were actually normal for the type of ink this is. Lastly, royal purple is made from a sea snail and was created on an island off of Crete or Mesopotamia. You had to extract its mucus, and in addition, it was very tedious to harvest, in addition to only producing a little bit every time you killed a sea snail, and thus royal purple naturally came to the royalty. It was heavily used by the Byzantines because for the Byzantines, royal purple was a status symbol. It was also used in several drawings in the Voynich Manuscript, so clearly the Voynich Manuscript cannot have belonged to a very low-class member of society. So, taking a look at the map of the Silk Road, all the inks are known to have been transported all throughout the Silk Road, and as you can see, there are multiple countries of interest for the inks. And in summary, the presence of these inks implies the uses of the Silk Road to transport and actually sell the inks to the Voynich Manuscript author. For some additional connections, most, if not all, the plants were identified by Edith Sherwood to have originated from Eurasia. This proves our hypothesis and does not support the hypothesis that the Voynich manuscript came from the Americas. In addition, the Voynich manuscript was likely inspired by the flow of knowledge on the Silk Road due to its wide range of herbal, astrological, and botanical data. Also, given that some inks used were expensive, especially the royal purple, in contrast to azurite, and even though some of them were cheap, we can assume that the author had some association to a very high-ranking status member or a monarch, like being a court alchemist. Finally, I will be discussing the future work. So for next steps, given the proper nouns for plants, the first words that we had investigated earlier, we will be investigating into other sources of proper nouns, including beyond plants. These include the captions in the astrological diagrams. We can also experiment with grammar to find the parts of speech, but our basis language has yet to be decided. We can also possibly use Word Creator to find the language frequencies, in addition to the KS tests for the fit between Voynichese and other languages. We will be applying natural language processing to what we've researched currently. And finally, we are still researching plants to find out the cultural origin of them in addition to history, and hopefully uncovering more of the Voynich manuscript. Acknowledgements. I'd like to thank the entire Voynich group for working so hard to uncover the serious secrets of the manuscript. Thank you to Rahul for his immense contributions to the Silk Road hypothesis and his help in making the colloquium. And thank you to Mr. Downing, our advisor, for being such an adamant supporter of me and the Voynich group and providing guidance on the path of research. And of course, thank you to ASDRP for giving me the opportunity to conduct research in the first place. Thank you for listening to my presentation. I will take questions now.
First, thank you very much. Excellent. Excellent job. It appears you are as clear as an unmuddied lake. There are no questions. I don't believe that.
Looking around, there doesn't seem to be any yet. Oh, so for the 6 sections were organized in a codex format. The first one was botanical, a botanical section with 113 drawings of plants, in addition to the astrological section, which had multiple diagrams of zodiac signs and some diagrams of the sun and the constellations. I believe it's a biological section, which had drawings of multiple bathing nude women. The cosmological section, which is a series of 9 fold-out multifolio geographical medallions. And finally, there's a pharmaceutical section, which has over 100 jarred herbs. And then the recipes section, which is a list of texts at the back of the book.
Yeah, do you want me to add anything, Alex?
Go ahead.
I was just going to point out, given the complete mystery about this this tome, this manuscript, it is speculated that it was a collection of either alchemic or homeopathic remedies produced by, as Alex said, probably a high-level functionary in a royal court. And so, for example, as he mentioned, some of the plants will appear in multiple places if we assume that the first word in the plant diagram is the name of the plant. And those are either going to be as part of the instructions for making a homeopathic remedy, or potentially some other sort of recipe incantation, magic spell. Nobody's really sure. I'll just mention one thing we forgot. There are approximately 40,000 words, and all of us that have studied the Voynich manuscript tentatively agree we know 9.
So can we identify the herbs to compare a known language's name for them to the script? We probably can, but some of the herbs drawings here, some of the herbs drawings, I don't think that there is enough information to actually identify the type of herbs there are. It's mainly the plants that have been identified.
Let me take Saketh's question. There's a list at the Voynichese library and also at a website called Voynich.ru, Voynich.nu, I put in the chat window, which is a sort of compendium collection of all things Voynich. Actually, we're hoping to get included in that someday, a list of authoritative articles, but I think that list on Voynich.nu is probably the best reference. To the best of my memory, the one at the Voynich library sort of goes in and out of access, free access.
So in terms of where the Voynich manuscript was found, so the Voynich manuscript has actually been passed down from owner to owner. It was originally owned and around the first records of it being owned were, I believe, with King Rudolph II of Italy, and then it was passed down and nobody knew the owner from 1622 to around the 18th century when a string of collectors continued. And then Wilfrid Voynich is one of the most well-known collectors of it, as he got the Voynich manuscript in the 20th century. And then finally, once he died, he passed it on to Hans B. Krauss, who donated the manuscript in 1969 to the Voynich library. So ultimately, the Voynich manuscript was not excavated, but it was merely passed down from owner to owner and then donated.
Yep, there's a whole period there that's kind of murky, isn't there?
Anyone else have any questions? The language that's closest to Voynichese, I believe that we associated Voynichese to Vulgar Latin, which is a type of modern Latin descended from classical Latin used by the Romans. But I don't think we can be too sure about that at the moment.
Yeah, that's correct. And sort of confusing things also are the apparent inclusion of characters from other languages in the manuscript, and it's hard to tell. Right now, this group has proposed Vulgar Latin, and it's getting a fairly good reception in the circles that study the manuscript, if you will.
Anyone else have any questions?
Okay, well, fantastic job again, Alex. Thank you very much, especially given the short notice that I gave you. Appreciate it immensely. Those of you that are here, thank you for joining us. Hopefully we sparked some curiosity in you. There are a number, and I'm not sure, 2, 3 existing Nova and History Channel episodes that talk about the manuscript and go into much more depth. It's worth taking a look at those finding them and taking a look at those if you're interested. And if there's nothing else, then I'm going to say thank you all and have a good rest of the evening.